All right, let's talk about the huge nuclear negotiations happening between the US and Iran. But we're going to look at it from a really specific angle, the perspective of a key American ally. We're breaking down how former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, sees the whole situation, all based on a recent interview he gave. So while these absolutely critical talks are going on, you've got a major player in the region, Israel, watching every single move with, you could say, immense concern. Their viewpoint is a massive piece of this whole geopolitical puzzle, and honestly, it's driven by a completely different set of assumptions. And this quote? It really gets right to the heart of the matter. Ambassador Danon starts from a place of deep, deep skepticism. For him, this isn't just about what's happening right now. He's pointing to a long history, a pattern of behavior that, in his view, makes trusting anything Iran says at the negotiating table, well, next to impossible. Okay, so that brings us to our first big idea here. We're going to unpack this skeptical stance and really look at why, from this perspective, the whole diplomatic process is seen as being so risky. You know, Danon points out this real contradiction. He says, on the one hand, of course, everyone hopes for a peaceful diplomatic solution. I mean, who wouldn't? But on the other hand, he argues that while the diplomats are talking, Iran is still out there making threats against both Israel and the United States. He believes they just aren't showing up with any real compromises. And when you combine that with past experiences, it just screams, be careful.
So this skepticism, it really builds into something bigger. It's not just about the fine print of a deal. It's about how Israel sees Iran's fundamental goals for the entire region.
And you can see a really clear cause and effect playing out here. According to Danon, when Iran gets up and publicly says it wants to destroy Israel and the US, Israel feels like it has no other option but to take them at their word. And that translates directly into action, keeping the military in a high state of readiness, both for defense and offense, and making it crystal clear that they will hit back, and hit back hard if they're attacked. And that, of course, leads us straight to the military side of things. Because while diplomacy might be what everyone wants, the threat of force is always there, and it's a huge part of the strategy from Israel's point of view. So this is a really crucial point Danon makes. He emphasizes that Israel and Iran don't even share a border. Think about that. This isn't some fight over a piece of land. He frames Israel's military posture not as aggression, but as a direct and, in his mind, necessary reaction to what they see as clear existential threats being made against them. And this quote, wow, this is the language of deterrence, pure and simple. It's a blunt warning, and it's meant to be heard loud and clear in Tehran. The message is basically, if you attack us, the response you get won't just be what you expect, it will be surprisingly powerful. Okay, so if a direct all-out war is this dangerous last-ditch option, what else is there? Well, this shifts the conversation to something way more complex, and that's the whole idea of regime change. And this is the exact question he was asked. It's blunt, for sure, but it's a super important one. Can you really change who's in charge of a country just with an air campaign? His answer was actually pretty surprising. And there it is. He basically says, yep, you're right. He completely concedes the point. Danon admits that trying to force a regime change with a military attack from the outside is, as he puts it, very hard to pull off. It's just not a realistic strategy. So if bombing from the outside doesn't work, what's the alternative? Well, Danon completely flips the script. He argues for an inside-out strategy. He says the real path to change is to support the people of Iran themselves. That means the international community should get behind the demonstrations and take real steps like officially designating the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to cut off the regime's power. And just to really drive home how high the stakes are and what kind of regime he's talking about, Danon makes this absolutely shocking claim that tens of thousands of protesters were massacred. He uses that number to paint a picture of incredible brutality and to argue that the world has a moral duty to stand with the Iranian people. All right, now let's shift gears just a little bit, away from Iran specifically, because the interview also touched on another, newer diplomatic push in the region that Israel is a part of. It's this thing called the Board of Peace. It's a new initiative led by the US, and the goal is to tackle some of the toughest conflicts in the region. And the very first one they mention in this context, the situation in Gaza. And his vision for how to move forward here is very, very sequential. Danon lays out a clear two-step plan. He says, look, first things first, Hamas has to be disarmed. Their power and their weapons have to be removed. And only after that critical first step is done, he says, can everyone else really move forward to the second step, rebuilding Gaza. So where does all this leave us? From this Israeli perspective, you've got this mix of deep distrust in diplomacy, a firm belief in military deterrence, and a real push to support change from within Iran itself. It all boils down to one critical question for us to think about. As the world watches, which one of these powerful forces, diplomacy, military threats, or internal change, will actually be the one to shape what comes next for Iran?